She was supposed to be the bride. Instead, Marin Ellis stood at the back of a church dressed in black silk and diamonds, her hand resting on the arm of a man who made entire city blocks go quiet when he walked through them. 3 weeks ago, her fiancé looked her in the eyes across a family dinner table and told her he was marrying her sister. The room chose silence. Her family chose peace. Marin chose something else. If you've ever been betrayed by the people who were supposed to love you most, stay until the end. Drop your city in the comments. Let me see how far this story travels. The dinner had been Tessa's idea. That was the first thing Marin should have noticed. Not the flowers on the table, not the good wine her mother had pulled from the back of the cabinet, not the way Breck kept touching the back of his neck every time someone asked him a question. It was the simple fact that Tessa had been the one to call. Tessa had been the one to suggest it, and Tessa had never in 31 years of shared existence suggested anything that was not in some way designed to center herself. But Marin had driven across the city anyway. She'd sat in traffic for 40 minutes with the windows down because the AC in her car was still broken, still on the list of things she kept meaning to fix. And she'd arrived with her hair slightly damp and a bottle of grocery store red tucked under her arm because that was the kind of woman she was. Practical, a little late, bringing what she could. The Ellis family home on Carver Street was a 3-story colonial that their mother, Judith Ellis, had maintained with the fierce, joyless discipline of someone who believed a clean house was evidence of a good life. The porch light was on. The hydrangeas along the front walk had been trimmed recently. Everything looked the way it always looked, arranged, deliberate, slightly suffocating. Marin let herself in without knocking. She'd stopped knocking years ago. Tessa was in the kitchen, laughing at something on her phone, wearing a white sundress at 6:30 on a Tuesday like she was already rehearsing for something. She looked up when Marin came in, and her smile did a small, complicated thing, widened for a half-second too long, then settled back into something warm and practiced. "You look tired," Tessa said. "Traffic on the West Side connector." "You should have taken the bridge." "The bridge adds 20 minutes. Tessa shrugged, already looking back down at her phone. "I always take the bridge?" That was the kind of conversation they had been having, in some variation or another, for most of their adult lives. Tessa offering a better way. Marin not quite taking it, both of them pretending this was a normal exchange between sisters. Judith came out of the dining room wiping her hands on a dish towel, and Marin caught something in her mother's face as she looked up. A brief, involuntary tightening around the eyes, there and gone, before she crossed the room and kissed Marin on the cheek. "You brought wine," Judith said, taking the bottle. She looked at the label with the particular expression she reserved for things that fell short of expectations without being returnable. "Grocery store had a sale." Breck came down the stairs. He was 34, tall in a way that photographs well but doesn't read in person, with the kind of face that looked trustworthy until you'd known him long enough to understand the difference between trust and familiarity. He'd been Marin's fiancé for 14 months. He'd proposed at a restaurant she'd picked, with a ring she'd helped him choose because he'd admitted he had no idea where to start. And she'd thought at the time that this was practical, that this was what mature relationships looked like. Two people building something together instead of waiting for a grand gesture that might never come. She had told herself that story so many times it had become smooth as riverstone. Easy to hold, easy to carry. Breck smiled when he saw her. It was a smile she had seen him use in work presentations. "Hey, you made it. I live 20 minutes away. Traffic, though." "Yeah." He kissed her forehead, not her mouth. Marin filed that away without examining it. They sat down to dinner. Judith at the head, Tessa and Breck across from Marin, the chair at the other end empty as it had been since her father left 11 years ago. Judith had never removed it. Marin had never asked why. The food was good. It was always good when Judith cooked for an occasion. Roasted chicken, vegetables that actually had flavor, bread from the bakery on 9th that cost 3 times what it should. Marin ate and answered questions about her work. She managed a small urban planning consulting firm, the kind of job that was significant in practice and impossible to explain at dinner parties. And the conversation moved the way it always moved in this house, around surfaces, touching nothing real. She was refilling her wine glass when Breck said, "We have some news." The table went quiet. Not the natural quiet of people pausing mid-conversation, a pre-loaded quiet, a quiet that had been waiting. Marin set the bottle down. Tessa looked at her hands. Her mother looked at the table. and Breck looked directly at Marin, and something in his expression was simultaneously apologetic and resolved. The look of a man who has made a decision he knows is wrong and has decided that being honest about it is the same as being absolved by it. "Tessa and I are getting married," he said. "We've been together for 7 months. I'm sorry for the way this is coming out. I wanted you to hear it from me." The chicken on Marin's plate was still warm. She could feel the heat of it, the steam still rising from the vegetables, the grain of the tablecloth under her fingertips where her hand had gone flat against the surface without her telling it to. She noticed these things the way you notice the details of a room when your brain is deciding whether to process what just happened or redirect the information somewhere else until later. Later never really came. That was the thing no one told you. "Say that again," Marin said. Her voice came out even. She hated that it did. She would have preferred rage, anything with weight to it, anything that proved she understood what she'd just heard. But her voice came out even and quiet, and it made her sound, she knew, like someone trying not to fall apart, which was exactly what she was doing, and the last thing she wanted anyone in that room to see. Breck said it again. Slightly different words, same content. Tessa looked up from the table and her eyes were wet, and she said, "It happened, Marin. Neither of us wanted it to. You didn't want to fall in love with my fiancé. I know how it sounds." "I'm not asking how it sounds. I'm asking whether you chose it." A silence. Tessa opened her mouth. Judith put her hand on Tessa's arm. That gesture, that quiet, instinctive reach. Not toward Marin, not to the daughter who was sitting there with a ring on her finger and a life that had just been handed back to her in pieces, but to the other one, the younger one, the one who had always required more cushioning from the world's sharpness. Marin understood, in that moment, that she had already lost this room. "We want to do this right," Breck said. He had the audacity to sound calm, to sound reasonable. "We're going to wait a respectful amount of time before any public announcement. I wanted you to know privately first. I still care about you, Marin. I want you to know that." She looked at him. She looked at the man she had lived alongside for 3 years, had planned a future with, had made room for in the small, unglamorous daily operations of her life, who ate her leftovers, who drove her to the airport before the sun came up, who she had watched sleep and believed she understood. And she felt something she had not expected. Not heartbreak, not even betrayal in its cleaner form. She felt erased, like she had been a draft of something they had both moved past. "How long have you been waiting to tell me?" she said. It was not a question. "We wanted to be sure." "How long, Breck?" He exhaled. "We've known for 3 months. It was serious." Marin pushed back from the table. She stood. She did not cry. She would not remember deciding not to cry, but she would remember not doing it, and she would hold that like a small, grim victory for months afterward. She picked up her jacket from the back of the chair. Her mother said her name. Judith's voice had the specific quality it always had when Marin was about to do something that would require the family to adjust its surface, that low, private warning, like a dog that has learned to signal before it bites. "Don't," Marin said. Just that. One word. She walked out through the kitchen and out the front door and down the porch steps. And she got in her car with the broken AC, and she sat there in the dark on Carver Street, and she breathed. She counted her breaths until they were even again. Until she could feel the backs of her thighs against the seat, the steering wheel solid under her hands, the specific, ordinary weight of her own body in space. Then she drove home. She did not call anyone. She ate cereal standing at the kitchen counter, and she looked out at the street below, and she thought, with a clarity that surprised her, that she had 2 choices. She could be the woman they expected her to be, the graceful one, the reasonable one, the older sister who understood that life was complicated and love was messy, and sometimes people couldn't help the people they fell for. She could be quiet and dignified and slowly be absorbed into the background of a story that was being written without her. Or she could do something else entirely. She didn't know what that was yet. She found out 3 days later. The call came from a number she didn't recognize, late on a Thursday afternoon when she was at her office staring at a zoning variance report she hadn't been able to concentrate on since Monday. She almost let it go to voicemail. "Marin Ellis," said the voice on the other end. Male. Measured. The kind of voice that was used to being listened to. "My name is Rafe Conti. I work for Veyron Santoro. He'd like to meet with you." She knew the name. Everyone in the city knew the name. The Santoro family had been a feature of this city's landscape for 40 years. Real estate, import logistics, private security, and beneath all of that, a structure of influence and enforcement that no one talked about in specifics, but everyone understood in general. Veron Santoro had taken over from his father 9 years ago and had, by most accounts, made the operation quieter, more deliberate, and significantly more dangerous. "Why?" she said. "He says you have a mutual interest in Brett Calder." She put down the zoning report. "When?" she said. The meeting was in a restaurant that didn't appear in any directory Marin could find. Third floor of a building on the north end of the financial district, private elevator, no signage on the door. A man in a dark jacket let her in without speaking. Another directed her to a table by the window where Veron Santoro was already sitting, reading something on his phone with the unhurried attention of someone who had nowhere to be and knew it. He was not what she expected, though she wasn't entirely sure what she'd expected. Late 30s, dark-featured, still in a way that wasn't stillness so much as the total absence of wasted motion. Every gesture deliberate, nothing given for free. He stood when she approached, which surprised her, and gestured to the seat across from him, and then sat back down before she'd finished processing the courtesy. "You came," he said. "You knew I would." A slight inclination of his head. "I knew you might." She sat. A server appeared and poured water and disappeared. No menus. Whatever was going to happen in this room was not a meal. "Tell me what you want," Marin said. He looked at her steadily. "What do you know about Calder's business dealings?" "He runs a mid-market investment firm, specializes in real estate-adjacent funds. Clean record, publicly at least." "Publicly? You're going to tell me it's not clean. I'm going to show you that it isn't." He reached into a folder on the table and placed a single sheet in front of her. A transfer summary. Numbers she recognized from the charity her sister ran, Tessa's Foundation for Women's Economic Independence, an organization that had been Tessa's primary public identity for 3 years. Her brand, her purpose, the thing their mother talked about at dinner parties as proof that the family had produced something worth admiring. The numbers moved in the wrong direction. "He's been routing money through the charity," Veron said, "using your family's name as institutional cover. The donors are real. The projects are mostly real. The administrative overhead is where it gets creative." He placed a second sheet beside the first. "Calder controls 3 shell entities that receive consulting fees from the charity. Those entities move the money twice and it comes out clean." Marin looked at the documents. Her hands were flat on the table. She made herself read every line. "How long?" she said. 19 months. Before the proposal, before the ring she'd helped him choose. She sat with that for a moment. She let it land fully, all of it, the complete shape of what had been happening while she was planning a future and making room in her life for a man who was simultaneously dismantling her sister's charity for personal gain. "Why come to me?" she said. "Because Calder is careful. I've been building a case for 8 months and I'm close, but I'm missing the last piece. Access to the Ellis family financials, specifically a private endowment your father left that Calder has been trying to get his hands on since before the engagement." He paused. "He intended to marry you, gain access through spousal accounting provisions, drain the endowment, and exit before the paperwork caught up with him." The room was very quiet. "He switched to Tessa when he realized I was watching," Veron continued. "She has co-signatory access on 2 of the same accounts. Same endgame, slightly different route." Marin understood everything now. Not just the betrayal, the architecture of it, the cold, structural planning. She had not been abandoned because Breck had fallen in love with someone else. She had been discarded because her sister offered a marginally more efficient path to the same theft. "What do you want from me?" she said, her voice still even. Still that terrible even. "Help me finish the case. I need 30 days and access to 1 account record you can provide without raising flags. In exchange, I'll make sure the evidence is airtight when it goes to the people who can act on it." "And Tessa? Your sister participated in the laundering passively. She knew enough to stay quiet. Whether that rises to criminal liability depends on the prosecutor. She's marrying him in 3 weeks." "Yes." Marin looked out the window at the city. The lights were coming on as the evening came down. Blocks of yellow and white laid out across the skyline. the ordered grid of a city that had no idea what was being arranged right now, in a restaurant that didn't have a name. "I want something else," she said. Veyron waited. "I want to be there when it comes apart, not as a witness, not watching from a corner." She turned back to him. "I want to walk into that wedding." He studied her. She could not read what the study produced, but she held her ground under it, which was harder than she expected. There was a quality to his attention that was different from other forms of scrutiny she'd been subjected to. It wasn't judging, exactly, and it wasn't the dismissive assessment she was used to from men in rooms like this. It was more like calculation, and not the kind that diminished its subject. "That's a significant visibility risk," he said. "If Calder suspects, he won't suspect me. I'm the woman he discarded. No one expects the discarded woman to walk back in." A pause. "You'd need to come in as someone they can't simply remove," Veyron said slowly. "I know." Another pause, longer. Then, "I've been negotiating a separate business matter that required a particular kind of social positioning. A married man carries different weight in certain rooms than an unmarried one." He looked at her with the directness of someone who does not cushion proposals. "I'm not suggesting this lightly. You're suggesting we get married. A legal arrangement, a private one, protective of both parties, dissolvable when the purpose is served." Maren looked at him for a long time. She thought about this dinner table on Carver Street, her mother's hand on Tessa's arm, Breck's voice, calm and apologetic, as if saying a thing gently absolved him of the thing said. The ring she was still wearing because she hadn't yet decided what to do with it. The endowment her father had left specifically for her, in a will that Tessa had contested once and been denied, that Breck had apparently seen as a target from the moment he'd walked through the family's front door. She thought about the kind of woman she had been before this week. The practical one, the reasonable one, the one who took the slow route because the fast one never seemed built for her. "All right," she said. They were married 12 days later in a courthouse proceeding that lasted 11 minutes. 2 witnesses from Veyron's staff. A clerk who asked the standard questions without interest. The ring Veyron placed on her finger was not a prop. It was a band of dark metal set with a single stone, old, clearly significant to him in some way she didn't ask about. And when it settled onto her hand beside the ring, she was still, absurdly, wearing from Breck. She took Breck's ring off and put it in her jacket pocket and felt the particular vertigo of someone who has done something they cannot undo and is not entirely sure they want to. He did not kiss her. The proceeding did not require it. They shook hands in the corridor outside like 2 people who had just signed a contract, which was exactly what they had done. And Maren drove home and sat with her new name for a long time in the quiet of her apartment. Maren Santoro. She said it out loud once to the empty room, decided she could live inside it. The wedding invitation had arrived at her mother's house. Tessa had been audacious enough, or Maren suspected strategic enough, to send one. A gesture that was designed to look like Grace, the magnanimous younger sister extending an olive branch to the woman she'd replaced. Maren had received a photo of it from her mother's housekeeper, who still had Maren's number and apparently had complicated feelings about how things had gone. The card was cream and gold. Tessa's name first, then Breck's. The venue was a place called Harrow Hall, a restored 1920s estate on the east side of the city that cost a minimum of $40,000 to rent for the evening. Maren looked up the venue. She looked up the seating capacity. She thought about the room, the vaulted ceiling, the chandeliers, the long straight aisle. And she thought about what it would look like when the doors opened. She called Veyron that night. "I need to know what you're wearing," she said. A pause. "Excuse me?" "To the wedding, I need to know so I can work around it." Another pause. "Navy, probably." "All right." She went shopping the next morning. She took 3 hours and spent more money than she had ever spent on a single item of clothing, and she did not feel guilty about it, which was itself new, a small loosening of something she hadn't known was tight. She came home with a dress that was the color of a winter night and had the kind of weight to it that changes how a person moves. Deliberate, composed, every step considered. She hung it on the back of her closet door and looked at it for a moment. Then she called her attorney and started the process of securing independent access to her father's endowment. Veyron's documentation had been enough to persuade the family trust administrator that the accounts needed review. It was quiet, legal, and final. Whatever Breck had been planning, the door was now closed. She did not tell her mother. She did not call Tessa. She did not answer the 3 messages Breck left in the days before the wedding. Careful messages, conciliatory, the kind designed to produce a specific response without saying anything that could be held against him later. She let them sit in her phone like unexploded ordnance, which was what they were. The morning of the wedding, she woke at 6. She made coffee and sat at her kitchen window and watched the city come to life below her. The delivery trucks, the early joggers, the slow Saturday morning unfurling of a world that had no idea what was going to happen at Harrow Hall by 3 o'clock. She thought about Breck. She tried to locate the grief she'd expected to feel more of, the clean, recognizable ache of lost love, something she could point to and name. But when she looked for it, what she found underneath the shock and the anger and the cold mechanical fury of those transfer documents was something quieter and more disturbing. The recognition that she had not been in love with Breck so much as she had been in love with the version of herself that she believed she was becoming alongside him. That woman had been reasonable and practical and moving steadily toward something that looked like the right life. That woman had not needed to be dramatic or difficult or unpredictable. That woman had bent herself into a shape that required nothing of anyone and therefore could be quietly set aside. She was not that woman anymore. Varen's car arrived at 2:15. She heard the knock and picked up her bag and took one last look at herself in the mirror by the door. The black silk, the diamonds at her throat that Veyron had sent over with a note that said only wear these, the ring that was not Breck's on her left hand. And she did not recognize the woman in the mirror entirely, and she was more all right with that than she'd expected. She opened the door. Veyron looked at her without expression for a moment. Then, "Ready?" Not a question. "Yes," she said. They took his car through the east side of the city in silence that was not uncomfortable. He did not make small talk. She appreciated this. She looked out the window at the streets and thought about the mechanics of what came next. The entrance, the room, the 120 guests who would not know her name until they heard it, and then would know it differently than they ever had. She thought about Tessa standing at an altar. She thought about her mother in the front row. She thought about Breck's face when the doors opened. "One thing," Veyron said as they turned onto the long private drive that led to Harrow Hall's main entrance. She looked at him. "When we go in," he said, "whatever you're feeling, don't let them see it. Make them wonder what you're thinking instead." She held that for a moment. "Is that how you do it?" "Every day." She turned back to the window. The hall came into view, all white stone and winter bare trees, the long windows lit from inside, the cars already filling the circular drive, people in formal wear moving up the front steps. A wedding, a celebration, the kind of event that cost too much and meant too little, and would be talked about for years for entirely the wrong reasons. The car stopped. Veyron got out and came around and opened her door, which he did not do, she suspected, because he was performing for anyone who was watching, but because he had decided on a version of this entrance that required a specific choreography, and he was a man who executed his decisions completely. She took his arm. They walked up the front steps of Harrow Hall together. At the top, one of the venue staff was holding the main doors. She looked at the door. She felt her heart hitting the inside of her chest in a way that was not fear, but was adjacent to it. The particular percussion of someone standing at the edge of something irreversible, about to step off. Veyron said very quietly, "Don't look for them. Let them look for you." The doors opened. 200 eyes turned toward the entrance. The low murmur of conversation that had filled the hall a moment before dropped away, not all at once, but in a wave. Silence spreading outward from the point where the doors had opened, the way light dies when you close the blinds, room by room, until the whole hall was quiet. Maren Ellis, Maren Santoro, stood in the doorway of her sister's wedding in black silk and diamonds, her hand steady on the arm of a man whose name had made this city flinch for 2 decades, and she did not look for her mother, and she did not look for Tessa, and she did not look for Breck. She looked at the room. She let the room look back, and in the front row, she saw Tessa's face go the color of chalk, and she saw Breck's jaw tighten, and she saw her mother's mouth form her name like a warning that had arrived too late. And the wedding, which had begun as the best day of her sister's life, had just become something else entirely. What that something else would cost all of them, that was still being decided. The silence lasted 4 seconds. Marin counted them without meaning to. A habit from childhood, filling dead air with numbers when words felt too dangerous. And in those 4 seconds, she watched the room rearrange itself around a single fact. She was here, and she was not alone. And nothing about either of those things was accidental. Then the murmur came back. Not the easy social hum of a wedding in progress, but something lower and more electric. The sound of 120 people recalibrating what kind of afternoon this was going to be. Varen moved first, not dramatically. He simply began walking, and Marin moved with him because she'd decided she would before the doors ever opened, and they came down the aisle together with the unhurried gravity of people who had nowhere to be and understood that knowing that was a form of power. Around them, the seated guests turned in their chairs. Some she recognized. Business people, city figures, a few faces from old family photographs. Several did not look at her at all. They looked at Veyron, that particular kind of not looking that meant the opposite of what it claimed. She saw her mother before Judith saw her. Judith Ellis was sitting in the 3rd row on the left, dressed in dove gray with her hair set and her posture architectural, the way it always was in public spaces. Chin up, shoulders back, the body language of a woman who had survived her life by performing the appearance of surviving it gracefully. She was talking to the woman beside her when Marin and Veyron passed, and then something made her stop mid-sentence and look up. And for one unguarded moment, her mother's face did something Marin had almost never seen it do. It broke. Just for a second. Then it reassembled. The chin came back up. The expression arranged itself into something controlled and unreadable. The look of a woman who has just understood the nature of the situation she is sitting inside. Marin did not stop. She held her mother's eyes for exactly as long as it took to make sure Judith knew the look was intentional, and then she looked away. They took seats near the center left, 7 rows back. A man she didn't know was already occupying the aisle seat. He looked at Veyron once and stood without a word and relocated himself 4 rows forward. No discussion, no explanation offered or requested. Marin sat down and placed her bag in her lap and folded her hands over it and breathed. Her ribs felt too tight for the breath she needed. She took a shallower one instead and made it work. Tessa was not yet visible. The bridal party had not come in. The hall continued its new, charged hum, and Marin could feel the attention on the back of her neck like a second-degree heat, not quite burning, but close enough that you knew what burning would feel like from here. Veyron leaned slightly toward her. "Don't check for reactions." "I'm not." "You're about to." She stilled the instinct to turn and look for Breck. "How do you do it?" she said under her breath. "Do what?" "Not look." He was quiet for a moment. "You practice on smaller things. Eventually the instinct goes away." She wasn't sure if that was reassuring or not. She thought about it and decided it didn't matter and kept her eyes forward. The ceremony began 8 minutes later. The music that filled the hall was something orchestral and familiar that Marin couldn't place and didn't try to. The bridal party came first. 4 women in deep green, not a color Marin would have chosen for Tessa, but then Tessa had always believed strongly in jewel tones as a personal brand. They walked in pairs, and 2 of them looked directly at Marin as they passed, and she gave them nothing. Not hostility, not acknowledgement. Just the composed surface of a woman watching an event unfold that has nothing to do with her, which was almost true, or had been, or would need to stop being very soon. Then Tessa came in. She was on the arm of their uncle, their father's older brother, a man named Gerald who had stayed in the family's orbit through loyalty to a woman he'd never quite gotten over, and a belief that presence was the same as support. He looked slightly gray. He did not look at Marin, but Tessa did. Tessa looked straight at her the moment she cleared the doorway, which meant Tessa had been looking for her before she walked in, which meant someone had told her, which meant the room had been talking about Marin's entrance for the full 8 minutes since it happened. Tessa's expression in that first second was raw, genuinely raw, unperformed, the face of someone who has just encountered something they planned for and discovered the plan was insufficient. She was beautiful in the dress. Marin registered this without particular feeling. The dress was ivory and structured and had a train that someone had clearly spent a significant amount of money on, and Tessa wore it the way she wore everything, with the ease of someone who has always believed the world would arrange itself to make them look good, and who has been right often enough that the belief has calcified into certainty. She looked afraid. "Good," said a small, terrible voice in the back of Marin's mind. She did not let it show. The ceremony moved, Vows were spoken. Maren heard them the way you hear traffic from inside a building. Present, textured, not quite real. Beside her, Veyron sat with the particular stillness she was learning to read as attentiveness. He was not performing disinterest. He was watching, recording. She could feel him cataloging the room the same way she'd been cataloging it, which was not a comfort exactly, but was a specific kind of company she hadn't expected to find useful. When the officiant asked if anyone had cause to object, the room held its breath in a way that was almost audible. Maren did not move. She felt Veyron's stillness beside her go, somehow, more still. Not yet. The word formed clearly in her mind, placed there not by impulse, but by the same cold, deliberate calculation that had gotten her into this building. Not yet. The moment passed. The vows continued. Tessa's voice shook slightly on the final line. Breck's did not. They were married. The guests applauded. Maren pressed her palms together twice and stopped. Veyron did not applaud at all, and several people around them noticed, and none of them said anything about it. The reception moved to the east wing of the hall, a long room with high ceilings and chandeliers and round tables dressed in white linen that probably cost more per tablecloth than Maren's first monthly rent check had. Staff circulated with champagne. A band was setting up near the far wall. The room expanded to hold conversation and the clinking of glass and the particular performance of joy that constitutes a formal reception. Maren took a glass of champagne and did not drink from it. She felt Breck before she saw him. That was the only way to describe it. A change in the air pressure of the room, a directional awareness she'd developed over 3 years of tracking a man's moods and proximity. And even now, even stripped of everything she'd believed about him, the animal recognition was still intact. He came toward them from the left. He had changed into a lighter jacket for the reception, and someone had touched up whatever product he put in his hair, and he looked objectively like a man in the best moment of his life, or like a man performing that impression, which from 15 feet away was indistinguishable from the real thing. He had a glass of something amber in his hand, and he was holding it with a studied casualness that told her he'd needed the drink before he'd come to find her. He stopped 2 feet away. He looked at Veyron first. There was something almost funny about that, the instinctive male calculation, the quick sizing up. And then Breck looked at Maren, and she watched him try to reassemble his expression into something appropriate and find there was no appropriate expression for this situation. Maren, he said. Breck. She let a beat pass. Congratulations. A muscle moved in his jaw. You could have called. You could have what? Told me you were coming, given some kind of... You invited me, she said. There was a card. Cream and gold. My name was on it. He looked at her. She watched him try to find the version of this conversation he'd rehearsed and realized none of the rehearsals had included Veyron Santoro standing 6 inches to her left. This is... He started, stopped, tried again. You didn't have to do this. Do what? This. A gesture. Vague. Taking in everything and committing to nothing. I'm attending my sister's wedding, Maren said. What exactly did you think I was doing? Breck's eyes went to Veyron again. Veyron had not moved or spoken. He stood the way he stood everywhere, as if the space around him existed for the purpose of containing him, which made everything in that space feel slightly contingent. Breck was a tall man and an educated one, and he had, in Maren's experience, a genuine confidence in rooms. But whatever he encountered in Veyron's expression in that moment was not met with confidence. What it was met with was the specific blankness of someone being told, without words, that the terms of this interaction were not his to set. I just want today to go smoothly, Breck said, and his voice had dropped. Then relax, Maren said. We're just guests. He looked at her for another moment. She held his gaze until he was the one who looked away, and then he moved back into the crowd, and she picked up her champagne glass and finally took a sip, and the bubbles went down cold and sharp, and she was grateful for the sensation of something real. He's scared, Veyron said quietly. He should be. Not of you, Veyron said. Of what he thinks I know. She looked at him. Do you know it? Enough. He surveyed the room. The rest comes tonight. She was still processing that when her mother found her. Judith came from the right, moving with the precision of a woman who had spent 50 years navigating rooms she needed to be in without appearing to need them. She stopped beside Marin and did not acknowledge Veyron, which was itself a form of acknowledgement, an active decision not to look at him, which meant he was the only thing in the room she was aware of. "Walk with me," Judith said. Not a request. Marin looked at Veyron. He inclined his head slightly. She handed him her glass and followed her mother toward the far edge of the room where the noise of the reception faded enough for a private conversation, which was what this was going to be whether Marin wanted it or not. They stopped near a window. The grounds of Harrow Hall stretched out below them, formal garden, bare trees, the gray December light doing what December light did, making everything look more honest than it wanted to be. Judith turned. Up close, her mother looked tired. Not the performance of tiredness, but the real thing, worn in around the eyes, and the slight downward pull at the corners of her mouth. She looked like a woman who had not slept well in 3 weeks, which was probably true, and in another moment in another life, Marin might have felt something soft toward that. But they were not in another moment. They were here. "What are you doing?" Judith said. "I'm at a wedding." "Don't." "Don't what, Mom?" "Don't treat me like I'm stupid. Who is he?" "My husband." The word hit her mother the way Marin had known it would. A visible impact, small but real, the body reacting before the mind could decide not to. Judith's chin came up. Her hands, which had been clasped at her waist, tightened. "Since when?" she said. "Recently." "Marin, what would you like me to say? You want a date? A ceremony description? We can do this differently. You could ask me how I am. You could ask what it was like to find out the way I found out. You could ask whether anyone called to check on me in the 3 weeks since that dinner." Marin heard the edge in her own voice and did not file it down. "But we're not doing that. We're doing the version where you ask me to explain myself so you can figure out how to contain the damage." Judith's jaw was set. "You're going to destroy this day." "This day," Marin said, "is already something other than what everyone in this room thinks it is. I'm just the only person here who knows that." "What does that mean?" "It means some things are going to come out tonight, and it would be better if you were prepared." "What things?" "Marin, what have you done?" "Nothing." She looked at her mother steadily. "I haven't done anything. That's the difference between me and the other people at this wedding." Judith stared at her. Behind the composure, behind the 61 years of maintaining a particular surface, Marin could see something moving. Doubt. Maybe fear. Maybe the beginning of an understanding she didn't want to arrive at. "You should go back to your seat," Marin said. "Enjoy dinner. I mean that." She left her mother at the window and walked back into the reception and found Veyron exactly where she'd left him, holding both their glasses and watching the room, and she took her drink back and stood beside him, and neither of them spoke for a moment. "Your mother," he said, "managed. She'll talk to Calder. Let her. She doesn't know anything yet." He considered this. "How are you holding up?" The question surprised her. She looked at him. His expression had not changed, still that composed, watchful stillness. But the question had been genuine. She could tell the difference between a social question and a real one by now. "I'm fine," she said. "That's not what I asked." She looked back at the room, at the tables filling with guests, the staff moving efficiently between them, the band beginning something low and warm that people were starting to drift toward. At Tessa, across the hall, in her ivory dress, laughing at something someone had said while her eyes kept moving. To the door, to Marin, to Breck, back to the door. The triangle of her anxiety, visible to anyone paying attention. "I keep waiting to feel worse," Marin said. "I thought I would by now. You're still in it." "Yeah." "The worst part comes later, when it's quiet." She absorbed this. "Speaking from experience?" A pause. "Yes." She did not push it. They went to their table. Dinner was an event. Courses arrived and were cleared with the mechanical choreography of expensive catering. People talked around them, more to each other than to Marin or Veyron, which suited her. Occasionally someone would approach, usually someone who knew the Santoro name, and Veyron would exchange a few words with them in the minimal way of a man who answers the questions asked and volunteers nothing, and they would move on. One man, older, city council, she recognized him vaguely, spent 30 seconds at their table looking at Veyron with something between calculation and alarm before making his excuses and retreating. Veyron watched him go with the particular expression of someone noting a data point. It was during the toast that things began to shift. The best man stood first, a friend of Breck's from school, rehearsed, slightly red from pre-dinner drinks, delivered something light and predictable that earned laughs in the appropriate places. Then Tessa's maid of honor, a woman named Sasha, who had been Tessa's best friend since college, and who Marin had always found exhausting in the specific way of people who are enthusiastic on behalf of other people while quietly keeping meticulous score. Sasha's speech was about what Tessa deserved, which was a particular kind of speech that Marin had encountered before at other events. The kind that catalogs a person's qualities in terms of what they were owed by the universe rather than what they had actually done. Tessa deserved love. Tessa deserved security. Tessa deserved a partner who saw her fully. The room applauded. Marin did not look at Veyron. Then Judith stood. This was not on the program. Marin had glanced at the order of events card on the table during dinner, and the mother of the bride had not been listed among the speakers. But Judith was standing with a champagne glass and the look of a woman who had decided something during the past hour and was going to see it through regardless of what it cost. Tessa has always been the light of this family, Judith began. The room was attentive. A mother's toast. Simple, expected, safe. From the time she was small, she found ways to bring people together, to remind us what matters. Judith paused. Her eyes moved across the room and landed on Marin for one moment with a weight that had something complicated inside it. I know today is not without its complications. Every family has them. What I want to say is that I believe in the love in this room, and I believe in my daughters. Both of them. Both of them. An offering. Marin recognized it, her mother extending something across the distance between them in the only way Judith Ellis had ever known how. Publicly, obliquely, with just enough deniability that if Marin didn't take it, the failure was Marin's. She kept her face even. Glasses were raised. People drank. Tessa caught Marin's eye across the room with an expression that was half appeal and half something harder to name. The look of someone who wants forgiveness and believes they are owed it before they have done anything to earn it. That was when Veyron's phone vibrated. He looked at it once, then leaned toward Marin. "My people are in position," he said quietly. "The documentation is here." She felt something shift in her chest, something that had been held very carefully for 3 weeks, releasing its tension in an almost physical way. "The transfers?" "Transfers, contracts, and one other document I didn't tell you about." He paused. Calder had a dissolution strategy, a timeline, written out. She looked at him. "A timeline for what?" "For the exit, after the accounts." He held her eyes. "Your name is on the first page. Tessa's is on the third. He planned both." The room continued around them. The band had started something slow that a few couples were beginning to move toward. Tessa was laughing again, her hand in Breck's, and Breck was smiling the smile Marin knew, the one that reached his eyes because he'd practiced until it did, the one that had taken her 3 years to understand was a performance. "He was going to do the same thing to Tessa," Marin said. It wasn't a question. Slightly different structure, but yes, she sat with this. The woman she had been 3 weeks ago, practical, careful, trying so hard to be reasonable, might have felt something like pity. She looked for it. She looked for the seam where mercy would enter, the place where she would decide that Tessa's blindness was enough, that her sister hadn't known the full scope of what she was standing inside, that this could be handled quietly and everyone could be spared. She found the seam. She looked at it for a long moment, and then she looked across the room at Tessa's laughing face, and she thought about the charity money, and she thought about the 7 months of silence while Marin was still wearing a ring, and she thought about her mother's hand reaching across the table to comfort the daughter who had done the harm while the other one sat there trying to breathe, and the seam closed. "I need to see the document," she said. Veyron reached into his jacket. The folder was thin, 3 pages, folded once. She took it and opened it with the careful hands of someone who knows they are touching something that changes things, and she read it, and the band played something with a lot of warmth in it while she read about her own name attached to an exit strategy with a projected date and a projected amount and a signed acknowledgement from Breck Calder that the original plan, her, had been deprioritized in favor of the revised approach. Her inheritance, written in projected numbers on a page someone had touched with a pen. Her sister's charity, listed as infrastructure. Her family's name, cataloged as an asset. She folded the document and placed it on the table beside her plate, and she looked at the stage at the far end of the room where a microphone stood near the band's setup, positioned there for the evening's toasts, still live, still pointing at the room. "The stage," she said. Veyron followed her gaze. He was quiet for a moment. "You sure? Are your people ready?" "They've been ready since we arrived." She pushed back her chair. She picked up the folder. She did not look back at him as she stood, which felt important, not out of coldness, but because what she was about to do needed to come from her entirely, from the part of herself that had been quiet for so long it had been mistaken for absent. She straightened the dress. She felt the weight of the diamonds at her throat, and the ring on her hand and the document under her arm. She started walking toward the stage. She was halfway across the room when Breck saw her. She watched his face change the way weather changes, faster than you can track it, the whole sky shifting before you finish noting the clouds. He said something to Tessa. Tessa turned, and for one long suspended moment the three of them were looking at each other across the width of a wedding reception. And the room had not yet caught up to what was happening, and Maren was still walking, and the microphone was getting closer. And the choice she was about to make was irrevocable, and she knew it, and she kept walking anyway. Because there was no version of leaving this room quietly that she could still live inside. She reached the stage. 3 steps up. Her heels on the wood were louder than the band, which had stopped playing. Not because anyone told them to, but because the musicians had eyes and had read the room the way people who perform for a living learn to read rooms. And what they read was that whatever was about to happen was not something you provided a soundtrack for. The microphone was at standing height. She adjusted it slightly with one hand, and the sound system caught the movement and produced a small, clean pop that traveled to every corner of the hall. Every head turned. Every conversation stopped. The catering staff near the back wall went still with plates in their hands. Maren placed the folder on the podium ledge to her left. She looked out at the room. 120 faces. Some she knew. Most she didn't. All of them carrying the particular suspended quality of people who do not yet understand what they are watching, but understand that it is something. She found Breck first. He was standing, had been moving toward the stage, and had stopped when she reached the microphone. And he was standing now, with his hands slightly out from his sides, in the posture of someone who has not decided yet whether to advance or retreat. His face had the look she had seen in it exactly once before. Not anger, not guilt, but the stripped-down focus of a man doing rapid damage calculation. Tessa was seated. She had not stood. She was gripping the edge of the table with both hands, and her face was white in a way that had nothing to do with the lighting. Her mother was in the 3rd row, very still, watching Maren with an expression that contained, for the first time tonight, something close to fear. Maren breathed. "I wasn't going to speak tonight," she said. Her voice came out even, clear. The acoustics of the hall were good. She didn't have to project. "I thought I'd come, see the room, and let the evening be what it was. I thought maybe that was enough." She paused. "But I was handed something during dinner that changed my mind. So I'm going to ask for 5 minutes, and I'm going to ask that everyone stay seated." That last part was directed at Breck. He understood it. She watched him understand it, and she watched him look past her to somewhere in the middle of the hall, and she knew without turning that he was looking for Veyron, and she knew what he found there because she knew by now what Veyron looked like when he had decided something. Breck did not move. She picked up the folder. "Most of you know this family through Tessa's work," she said. "The Foundation for Women's Economic Independence. 3 years of fundraising, significant press, a board of directors that includes 4 people in this room tonight." She let that land. "The foundation has raised approximately $2.3 million across 11 campaigns. The published overhead rate is 11%. The actual overhead rate," she opened the folder to the 2nd page, "is closer to 38. A sound moved through the room. Not quite words. A collective processing, low and immediate. The difference is routed through 3 consulting entities." She read the names. They were bland names, the kind designed to sound institutional without meaning anything. Those entities have one beneficial owner. His name appears on the registration documents. She looked up. Breck called her. Silence. Real silence this time. The kind that has weight. Breck said, "That's enough." His voice came from 10 feet away. He had moved without her tracking it, which she noted without alarm. She'd known he would move eventually. He was at the foot of the stage steps now, and his voice had the tight, modulated quality of a man who is furious and disciplined enough to know that fury is a liability. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said. "I have the incorporation documents," she said. "I have 12 months of transfer records. I have the consulting invoices, which are," she looked at the page, "impressive in their detail for work that was never performed. Those documents are confidential. They were provided to me by someone who obtained them through legal channels." She looked at him. "Breck, I'm not going to debate the sourcing with you in front of your wedding guests. If you want to debate it, there will be an appropriate venue for that. I think you know what venue I mean." His jaw was working. She could see the calculation happening in real time. How much to deny, how much to attack her credibility. Whether there was a version of this he could still control. "You're doing this because you're—" He stopped. "Because I'm what?" A beat. Hurt. The word landed in the room with the specific toxicity of a statement designed to reframe everything preceding it. She watched it move through the guests. The slight softening, the instinctive sympathy, the way a single word can turn an accusation into a symptom if you deploy it correctly. She had expected this. "I am hurt," she said. "That's true. What's also true is that this," she held up the folder, "has nothing to do with hurt. These numbers are what they are, regardless of how I feel." She was about to continue when Tessa stood up. She had not expected that. She had expected Tessa to stay in her seat, stay contained, let Breck manage it the way Breck managed things. Smoothly, technically, with the practiced deflection of a man who had built his career on making problems sound like misunderstandings. She had not expected her sister to stand up at her own wedding reception and cross the room toward the stage with the particular momentum of someone who has made a decision they can't walk back from. Tessa stopped at the base of the steps, beside Breck, which told Maren everything, and also looking at her sister's face, not quite beside him, a half step apart, a gap so small it was almost invisible, and yet present, the way a crack in a wall is present. "Stop," Tessa said. Her voice was not what Maren expected either. It was not pleading. It was not the tearful appeal she'd been braced for. It was flat, and it was cold, and it had an edge to it that Maren had heard from her sister exactly once before. A night 12 years ago, when they were young and something had broken between them that neither of them had ever fully named. "You don't know everything," Tessa said. "Then tell me what I'm missing." "Not here, Tessa." Maren looked at her sister, just looked for a moment past the dress and the venue and the performance of the evening at the woman underneath all of it. "There isn't a not here anymore. We're here. This is the room." Something moved in Tessa's face. A collapse that was not quite a collapse. A fracture held together by sheer force of will, and Maren could see how much force it was taking, could see it in the tendons of her sister's neck and the grip of her hands and the way Tessa's eyes were doing something they almost never did. Filling. "You think you know what happened," Tessa said. "You think you know what I knew and when I knew it and what I chose." Her voice had gone quieter. The quieter it went, the more the room strained toward it. "You don't." "Then correct me." "He told me—" Tessa stopped, swallowed. "He told me the foundation structure was standard, that the consulting arrangement was legal, that everyone did it." A pause. I believed him. The room processed this. Maren processed it. She looked at her sister, really looked, the way she had not allowed herself to look all evening. And she searched for the lie in it, the performance, the strategic deployment of partial truth, and she found the fracture lines in Tessa's face, and she thought, she knew something. She didn't know everything. She knew something, and she told herself the story Breck gave her because it was easier than asking the question that would make her responsible for the answer, which was its own kind of complicity, which was not the same as ignorance, which was something she would have to sit with later. "The consulting arrangement is not standard," Maren said. "Your foundation's legal counsel would have told you that if you'd asked." "I know that now." "When did you know it?" A long pause. "Tessa." Maren's voice was very quiet. "When?" 4 months ago. Barely audible. I found a document. I asked him about it. He said, "What did he say?" Tessa looked at Breck. Breck was watching his new wife with an expression that had gone very still in the specific way of a man who is watching someone decide how much to say and calculating his response to each possible outcome. "He said it was being restructured," Tessa said, "that it would be clean by the end of the year, that I didn't need to worry about it." "And you believed him?" Tessa turned back to Maren, her jaw set. "I was in love with him." "That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have." The room was so quiet that Maren could hear someone near the back shifting in their chair, the faint clink of a glass being carefully set down. She looked at her sister in the ivory dress in the chandelier light, and she felt, against every intention, the complicated and completely inconvenient reality of knowing someone their entire life. She was angry. She was still angry. Would be, probably, for a long time. But she looked at Tessa's face and she saw something she recognized from before the choices and the betrayals and the 7 months of silence. She saw a woman who had told herself a story and held it together with both hands and was watching it come apart in front of 120 people, and whatever Maren had intended to feel about that, what she actually felt was more complicated than she'd budgeted for. She looked at Breck. "The dissolution timeline," she said. "The written one. Tell me what that was." Breck said nothing. "There's a document," Maren said to the room, to no one in particular. "A planning document. It has a timeline for extracting funds from 2 sets of accounts, one belonging to me, one connected to the foundation, and a projected exit. The document has a projected date." She looked at Breck. "June. Next year. You are going to be 6 months married and 3 months gone." Tessa turned to look at her husband. The half-step gap between them widened. Breck said, "That document is being taken completely out of—" "It has your signature," Maren said. Silence. "It has your signature on the final page," she said. "Below a paragraph that describes the Ellis family endowment as a primary asset. Below a paragraph that describes my sister as—" She looked at the page, though she had memorized it, "a secondary vehicle with equivalent access points." The room made a sound. Tessa made no sound. She was looking at Breck with the face of someone who has just felt the floor they were standing on give way and has not yet decided whether to reach for something or simply fall. "Breck," Tessa said. One word. His name. The way you say a name when you are not asking a question but requiring an answer. He looked at her. Something passed across his face. Something real, Maren thought, which was almost worse than if it hadn't been. Not quite guilt. Closer to the particular grief of a man who had wanted a version of things to be different and hadn't found a way to make them so. "It wasn't—" he started. "Don't," Tessa said. "Tessa, listen. Don't." Her voice had dropped to something that was barely a voice at all. "Don't tell me to listen. Don't tell me what it was. I was on a document. I was a vehicle." She said the word like it had cut her saying it. "How long?" "It's more complicated than— How long did you know about the endowment before you approached Maren?" The room had gone the particular quality of airless that happens when no one is breathing quite normally. Breck said nothing. "He knew before he met you," said a voice from the middle of the room. Everyone looked. The man who had spoken was someone Maren didn't know. Mid-50s, expensive suit. The look of someone who has been sitting on something for the duration of a long dinner and has decided the holding is no longer worth the cost. He was at a table near the center, and he stood as people looked at him, and he had the self-possessed quality of someone accustomed to rooms like this one and not intimidated by them. "My name is Warren Chu," the man said. "I'm the chair of the Foundation's audit committee." He was looking at Tessa when he said it, not at Breck and not at Maren. "Tessa, I've been trying to reach you for 6 weeks. I left 4 messages. Tessa stared at him. "We identified anomalies in the Q3 filing in October," he said. "We brought them to the executive director, who referred us to your husband's legal team, who told us the matter was under internal review." He paused. "I should have pushed harder. I'm sorry I didn't." The room erupted. Not in noise, in motion. The specific, barely controlled movement of people who have been sitting very still for a very long time and have now been released from that stillness. Chairs turning, people leaning to speak to each other in urgent undertones. A ripple of reconstitution as everyone in the hall began revising the evening they thought they'd been having. In the middle of it, Tessa turned and walked away from the stage, not toward the exit. Toward the far corner of the hall, where there was a service door, and she went through it, and the door closed behind her, and Breck stood at the foot of the stage steps and watched the door close, and his face did something that Maren had no framework for, and did not want to spend time developing one. She came down from the stage. She did not look at anyone as she descended the steps. She heard Veyron moving behind her. She didn't have to see it. She could feel the change in the room's energy that came with his proximity, the way the space reorganized itself around him. She was almost to the bottom step when Breck moved into her path. Not threateningly, physically, but not with threat. With the desperate purposefulness of a man who has one move left and knows it and is taking it anyway. "You don't understand what you've done," he said. Low, just for her. "I understand exactly what I've done. The people involved in this, the people behind the consulting structure, they're not—" He stopped. His eyes moved to Veyron, who had come to stand at Maren's shoulder, and then back to her. "They're not people you expose at a wedding and walk away from, Maren. You think this is over. It isn't." She looked at him. "Are you threatening me at your wedding reception?" "I'm warning you." "There's a difference?" "Yes." And his voice had changed. The controlled management of it had stripped back to something raw, and she didn't think it was performance. She thought it was fear, and not fear of her, and not fear of Veyron, but something behind both of those things, something that had been sitting underneath all the calculation and planning and quiet manipulation of the past 3 years. The consulting entities. The money doesn't just belong to me. I'm not the only one with exposure here. There are people with a great deal more to lose than I have, and they know your name now, and they know— He stopped himself. The room was loud enough around them that no one near them could hear the conversation clearly. Maren made herself stay very still and hear every word. "They know what?" she said. Breck looked at her. The fear she'd seen in his face was real. She was certain of it now. "You should leave," he said. "Tonight. Not just the hall. I mean, you should take whatever you have and put some distance between yourself and this city for a while. I'm telling you this because—" He stopped again. "Because what?" "Because whatever you think I am, I didn't want you hurt." Maren stared at him. 3 years. 3 years and a ring and a plan and a document with her name on it and a column labeled primary asset. And he was standing in front of her at his own wedding telling her he hadn't wanted her hurt. And she could not tell, could genuinely not tell, whether this was the last manipulation or the first true thing he'd said to her in years. "Who are the other parties?" Veyron said. His voice came from just behind Maren's left shoulder. Quiet. Absolutely level. The kind of voice that does not need volume because the room around it rearranges itself to ensure it's heard. Breck looked at him. Whatever Breck had been managing, the fear, the calculation, the desperate warning, it changed when he looked at Veyron. Changed in a way that told Maren, with a cold dropping certainty, that what Breck was afraid of was not law enforcement and not public exposure and not the foundation board or the audit committee. He was afraid of the same kind of thing Veyron was. "You already know," Breck said to him. A pause. "Tell me anyway." Dmitri Vassell. The name meant nothing to Maren. It meant something to Veyron. She felt it, not in a visible reaction because there wasn't one, but in the quality of the stillness that followed the name. A stillness that was different from his ordinary stillness. Denser. More loaded. "Say that again," Veyron said. "You heard me." And that was when Maren understood that something had just happened that she did not have the map for. That the room she thought she was standing in, the room where the story was about betrayal and money and a family dinner that had gone wrong, had a room underneath it, and in that room were things she had not been told. And the expression on Veyron Santoro's face, for the first time since she'd known him, was something other than composed. He took her arm, not roughly, but with a direction to it that was not a suggestion. "We need to go," he said. "I'm not—" "Now, Maren." She looked at his face. She looked at the thing that was moving underneath the composure, the thing she had no name for because she had never seen it there before, and she made a rapid and instinctive decision to trust what she was seeing, and she moved. They were through the service corridor in 40 seconds. One of Veyron's men was waiting at the rear exit. She recognized him from the courthouse the day they were married, a broad-shouldered man with a quiet face whose name she had not been told. The car was already running in the service lane behind the hall. She got in. Veyron got in beside her. The door closed. The car moved. She sat in the moving dark and felt her heartbeat in her fingernails and her temples, and the backs of her knees, everywhere at once. The full-body percussion of someone whose body had understood something before their mind finished processing it. "Who is Dimitri Vassell?" she said. Veyron was looking straight ahead. "Someone I should have considered as a variable," he said, "before I moved on Calder. That's not an answer. It's the most accurate one I have right now." Veyron. He turned to look at her, and she saw it again. That thing she'd seen when Breck said the name. Not fear exactly, but the close cousin of it. The version of it that lives in people who have trained themselves not to feel fear and feel something adjacent to it instead. Something that arrives as recognition. "Vassell runs the money behind the consulting structure," he said. "I knew Calder was a front. I thought I knew for who." A pause. "I was wrong about who." She held this. "What does that mean for the case?" "It means the case is more complicated than I built it for." "What does it mean for us?" The car made a turn. Outside the window, the city moved past, indifferent and lit and completely uninvolved. "It means," Veyron said slowly, "that we walked into that hall tonight and made ourselves visible to someone I was not prepared to make us visible to. And that changes the situation in ways I need a few hours to think through." Maren looked at him. "Are we in danger?" A pause, shorter than she would have liked. "Possibly," he said. She sat back against the seat. She looked at the ceiling of the car and she breathed, one breath and then another, and she thought about the stage and the microphone and the folder was still in her hand, she realized. She had carried it down from the stage and through the corridor and into the car, and she was still holding it, creased now from the grip. She had walked into a room tonight to dismantle two people who had betrayed her. She had succeeded. She had done the thing, and it had gone the way she'd planned. And Breck was facing exposure, and Tessa's marriage was in pieces before the final toast. And she had stood in a chandelier-lit hall and said the true things out loud in a room full of people who needed to hear them. And in doing so, she had apparently stepped into the sightline of someone who made Veyron Santoro use the word possibly about her safety. She looked at the folder in her hands. She looked at the crease marks from her grip. She thought about the woman she had been 3 weeks ago, bringing grocery store wine to a family dinner, sitting in traffic with the windows down, telling herself that practical was enough, that steady was enough, that the shape of the life she was building would eventually fill in and feel like the thing she'd meant it to be. That woman was very far away now. And where she was going, the place the car was taking her through the lit and indifferent city towards something she did not yet know the name of, she was going to need to become someone that woman would not entirely recognize. And she was going to have to do it quickly. And she was going to have to do it without the luxury of... She did not sleep. The safe house was a 4th-floor apartment in a part of the city she didn't know well. The kind of building that had no particular identity, neither rundown nor polished. The architectural equivalent of a face designed not to be remembered. Veyron's people had brought her here directly from Harrow Hall, and she had sat in the kitchen under fluorescent light while a man whose name she still didn't know made coffee without asking if she wanted any, and set it in front of her and left the room. She drank it. Both cups. She was still in the black dress and the diamonds, and she had not taken either off because taking them off felt like conceding something she wasn't ready to concede. Veyron came back at 2 in the morning. She heard him before she saw him. The key in the lock. The specific quality of the door closing behind him that was different from how anyone else closed a door, contained and final. He came into the kitchen and looked at her, and then looked at the empty coffee pot and said nothing about either. He sat across from her. His jacket was off. The top button of his shirt was undone in a way she'd never seen before, and it registered as significant without her being able to articulate why. "Tell me," she said. He put both hands flat on the table. Dimitri Vassell is not a name that exists in any public record. He operates through 6 holding companies across 4 jurisdictions. I have been aware of him as a background figure in this city's financial landscape for approximately 4 years. A pause. I did not know he was connected to Calder. That was a failure of intelligence on my part. What does he want? The same thing everyone in his position wants. control of revenue streams without personal exposure. He looked at her steadily. The consulting arrangement through Tessa's foundation was one of at least 4 similar structures he runs in this city, small enough to avoid scrutiny, profitable enough to matter. Calder managed 2 of them. So when I exposed Calder tonight, you exposed a thread that leads to Vassell's infrastructure. Yes. She absorbed this. And Vassell knows that. He knew within the hour. I have reason to believe he had someone at the reception. She thought about the room. 120 guests. Any of them. What does he do, she said, to people who pull threads? Véron held her eyes. He makes the problem disappear, cleanly, with enough distance that nothing points back. People, she said, not just problems. Yes, she sat with that. She turned the empty coffee cup in her hands. A small ceramic thing, white, slightly chipped on the rim, the kind of ordinary object you only notice in extraordinary moments. She turned it once, twice, and set it down. What are our options, she said. 3. We run. Take you out of the city tonight. Establish you somewhere Vassell's reach is limited. Build a legal case from a distance over the next several months. 2. He stopped. 2. We give Vassell something that makes exposing us more costly than tolerating us. A form of mutually assured damage. Blackmail. Insurance. The distinction matters in practice. And 3. He was quiet for a moment. We take the case public before he can close it. All of it. Calder, the foundation, the consulting structure, the holding companies, everything I've built in 8 months. We push it to the financial crimes unit tonight. Make it so large and so public that removing us becomes impossible because we've already been seen as the source. She looked at him. That exposes your intelligence gathering. Yes. It exposes how you obtain documents. The legality would be questioned. Yes. It could compromise your entire operation. Yes. He said it without flinching and without the particular staginess of a man performing sacrifice. He said it the way you state a fact that you have already finished grieving. Why would you do that, she said. Because it's the right move for the situation. That's not what I asked. He looked at her. The fluorescent light was not kind to anyone, but it was especially unsparing at 2 a.m. after an evening like this one. And what she saw in his face was not what she'd seen across the table at that nameless restaurant the first night. The composed, deliberate surface of a man conducting a negotiation. What she saw now was something older and more tired and considerably more real. Because I brought you into this, he said, and I didn't have the complete picture when I did. That's on me. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and picked up his phone, which was lying face down beside his hand, and she put it in front of him. Make the call, she said. Marin. Make the call, Véron. Option 3. We go public. You understand what that means for the timeline, for the dissolution of our arrangement, for your ability to... I understand, she said. Make the call. He looked at her for one more moment. Then he picked up the phone. The next 4 hours were not cinematic. They were the opposite of cinematic. They were the grinding, procedural, exhausting work of people who have decided to do something irrevocable and are now executing it without the luxury of stopping to reconsider. Véron made 3 calls in the kitchen while Marin sat at the table. The third call lasted 40 minutes and was mostly him listening, interjecting in short, precise sentences and listening again. When it was done, he set the phone down and said, The Financial Crimes Unit has a duty investigator. He'll receive a secure file transfer in the next 20 minutes. He's agreed to treat it as a formal submission. Will he act on it tonight? He'll open the file. Whether he acts before morning depends on what he sees. He'll act, she said. Véron looked at her. What makes you certain? Because the file is good. You said it yourself, 8 months. If it's what you said it is, he'll act. He considered this. Then, almost imperceptibly, it's what I said it is. Then he'll act. She stood. Her legs were stiff from hours in the chair and the dress pulled wrong when she moved, and she ignored both. She walked to the window and looked out at the city at 3 a.m. The reduced traffic, the amber pools of streetlight, a taxi moving through an intersection 4 blocks down, with the particular purposefulness of something that knows where it's going. "I need to talk to Tessa," she said. "No, not tonight. But before this goes to the press, before the story solidifies without her side in it." "Her side," Varen said carefully, "may not help her." "I know." She turned from the window. "I still need to talk to her." He studied her. "Why?" She thought about how to answer that accurately. "Because she's going to find out what kind of man she married. She found out tonight that she was on a document. She hasn't found out yet what being on that document actually means, what he was planning to do to her after the accounts cleared." She held Veyron's gaze. "She should hear that from me, not from a prosecutor." A long pause. "Tomorrow," he said. "Not tonight." "Tomorrow," she agreed. She didn't sleep. She sat in the bedroom they'd given her, a room with a narrow bed and a window that faced a brick wall and a lamp that buzzed faintly at a frequency designed to make extended stay unpleasant. And she sat on the edge of the bed in the black dress, and she let the night settle into her. She thought about what she'd done. She went through it in sequence, without softening. The stage, the microphone, the folder, Tessa's face, her mother in the third row, Breck's voice saying they're not people you expose and walk away from. She went through it all, and she asked herself the question she needed to ask, whether she had done this for justice or for herself. And she found, sitting in the buzzing lamplight at 4 a.m, that she could not fully separate the two, and she decided that was honest rather than damning. She had wanted them accountable. She had wanted them accountable, and she had wanted to be the one standing in the room when it happened, and both of those things were true simultaneously, and the world was going to have to hold both. She finally lay down at 4:30. She did not intend to sleep. She was out in 3 minutes. She woke to her phone at 7:12. The number was Tessa's. She stared at it through the first 2 rings. Then she picked up. "Where are you?" Tessa's voice. Raw. The aftermath of a night that had apparently been as sleepless as Marin's. "Somewhere safe. I need to see you." "Tessa, he left." A pause. The quality of the silence told Marin everything about what that pause contained. "Last night, after the police, he got in a car and he left, and he hasn't..." Another pause. "He hasn't come back." Marin sat up. "Police," she said. "There were police last night? 2 plainclothes. They came to the hall at midnight. They took Breck somewhere for... They said voluntary interview, and he went and he didn't..." Tessa's voice broke on the word and reassembled. "He didn't come back." Option 3 had moved faster than she'd expected. "Where are you right now?" Marin said. They met at a diner 12 blocks from the safe house, the kind of place that stays open all night and has seen everything and judges nothing. Marin arrived first. She had changed out of the dress, borrowed clothes from whatever was in the safe house, jeans and a dark sweater that were close enough in size to pass, and she was on her second coffee when Tessa came in. Tessa was still in the clothes she'd changed into after the reception. Her hair was down and had the compressed look of hair that had been pinned elaborately and then released without care. The makeup she'd had on last night had been removed imperfectly. There were traces at the outer corners of her eyes. She looked, for the first time in Marin's recent memory, like a person rather than a production. She sat down across from Marin without greeting. The server came. Tessa ordered coffee and didn't touch it when it arrived. "How much did you know?" Marin said, not accusing, direct. "I told you last night. Tell me again, with more detail." Tessa looked at the table. "I knew the overhead numbers were wrong. I found a transfer record in October. It was in a filing I wasn't supposed to see. Breck's assistant sent it to me by mistake." She turned the coffee cup. "I confronted him. He explained it. He had a way of explaining things that made you feel like the concern was the problem. Like being worried was the unsophisticated response and understanding would come if you just trusted him." Marin knew this. She knew it from 3 years of her own experience. "He told me it would be resolved. I wanted to believe him." "What about the consulting entities? Did you know those were his?" "No." Tessa looked up. "I knew the consulting fees existed. I thought they were standard. Sasha, the board, everyone thought..." She stopped. "We weren't asking the right questions." "Because he made the wrong questions feel like disloyalty." "Yes." Marin drank her coffee. The diner was quiet. Two other occupied tables, both solo, both absorbed in their own mornings. Outside the window, the city was doing what it always did, indifferent and continuous. "There's a document," Marin said. "I need to tell you about the document." She told her. She told her about the projected timeline, the exit strategy, the column that listed Tessa as a secondary vehicle. She told it in plain sequential language without softening the edges, because Tessa deserved the unpadded version even though the unpadded version was terrible, and because the padded version would let Tessa build a story around what had happened instead of understanding what had actually happened. Tessa listened. She did not cry. Her face did the compression thing it had done last night, that fracture held together by force, and she held it together through all of it, through the timeline and the exit date and the projected amounts and the column heading, and when Marin finished, Tessa was quiet for a very long time. "He was going to leave me," she said, "on a schedule." "Yes." "He had a date." "June." Another long silence. "I took your fiancé," Tessa said. Not to Marin specifically, to the table, to the air between them. "Yes. And he was using me. Yes. Both of us." In sequence. Tessa looked up. Her eyes had something in them that was neither tears nor their absence, but a third thing. A dry, hollow clarity, the look of someone who has been emptied out so completely that what remains is clear simply because there is nothing left to obscure it. "What happens now?" she said. "The Financial Crimes Unit has the documentation. They took Brecken last night. I don't know where that stands this morning." Marin paused. "The Foundation is going to face scrutiny. The board will likely move to dissolve or restructure. Your name is going to be in the reporting." Was I complicit? Marin looked at her sister. Straight at her, no deflection. "You stayed quiet when you had information," she said. "Whether that's legal complicity depends on what the investigation finds and what you knew specifically. What it definitely was," she stopped, chose the words, "was a choice you made because it was easier than the alternative." Tessa took that. She absorbed it the way you absorb a punch you saw coming. It still hurts, but the bracing is its own form of dignity. "I'm going to cooperate," Tessa said. "That's the right decision." "I know." A pause. "I know it's the right decision. I'm not doing it because it's right. I'm doing it because—" She stopped again. Her jaw worked. "Because if I don't, I become someone I don't know how to look at." Marin said nothing. There was nothing to add to that. They sat in the diner for another 20 minutes without speaking much. The server refilled their coffees. The city outside continued its morning. At some point, Tessa reached across the table and put her hand over Marin's, and Marin looked at it. Her sister's hand, familiar as her own, the hand she'd held crossing streets as children before either of them knew what crossing streets cost. And she didn't move it away. She didn't hold it back either. She let it be what it was, a gesture from a complicated person in a moment of genuine remorse, which was not forgiveness and was not absolution and was not the resumption of the relationship they'd had before any of this. It was smaller and more tentative than any of those things. It was the acknowledgement that something had broken and they were both still in the room. Marin left the diner at 9:15. She was half a block from the entrance when her phone went. "Veyron. Where are you?" he said. "On the street. I met Tessa." A pause. "We have a problem." The tone of it stopped her walking. She stood on the sidewalk with the city moving around her and the morning cold against the back of her neck. "What problem?" "Vasil moved last night. Not toward you. Toward the documentation." His voice was controlled, but the control had a particular tension in it she hadn't heard before. "He has someone inside the Financial Crimes Unit, not the duty investigator. Someone above him. The file submission was flagged before it was opened." Her stomach dropped. "How?" "I don't know yet. The investigator is—" He stopped. "He's been suspended pending an internal review. Someone filed a complaint against him at 6 this morning, alleging procedural violations in accepting the submission." She stood in the cold. She thought about 8 months of work. She thought about the folder. She thought about standing at that microphone and saying the true things, and the room going silent and believing for approximately 18 hours that the truth had weight. "Can we recover it?" she said. The original submission is in a legal gray area now. If we push it through alternative channels, press, direct to the DA's office, we can still move it, but Vassell will respond. He'll move faster than we can manage the narrative. What does that mean concretely? It means, Baron said, and she heard him choose words the way you choose steps on unstable ground, that we may have a window of approximately 6 to 8 hours before this gets substantially more difficult to control. And within that window, I need you somewhere I can account for you. I'm not hiding. I'm not asking you to hide. I'm asking you to Veyron. She turned and looked back at the diner, at the window where she could still see Tessa's shape at the table, bent forward over the coffee she still hadn't drunk. If we have 6 hours, we use them. We don't spend them with me in a room. A long pause. What are you thinking? He said. The board chair, she said. Warren Chu. He was at the reception. He's been trying to reach Tessa for 6 weeks. He has his own documentation. The Q3 anomalies, whatever the audit committee found independently. If his records corroborate ours from a separate source, they can't flag both submissions. They can't suspend 2 different investigators on the same morning without it becoming a story in itself. Silence on the line. That could work, Veyron said, carefully. I know it could work. Get me Chu's number. It's a significant risk. Vassell's people will know we're moving when we contact Chu. Then we move fast. Marin, 6 hours, she said. Clock started 8 minutes ago. She heard him breathe. She heard the calculation. She had learned, in the weeks since the courthouse, to hear the difference between the pause that meant he was about to redirect her and the pause that meant he was running the numbers and finding them acceptable. This was the second kind. I'll get you Chu, he said. She put the phone in her pocket and stood on the sidewalk in borrowed clothes in the December morning, with her heart hitting the inside of her chest in the way it did now. Not with the panic of someone who did not know what they were doing, but with the specific percussion of someone who knew exactly what they were doing and understood the cost and was going to do it anyway. She had 5 hours and 52 minutes. She started walking. The meeting with Warren Chu happened in a conference room on the 14th floor of a building in the financial district. Neutral territory, Chu's suggestion, and she respected the instinct. He was already there when she arrived, jacket on, a leather portfolio open in front of him, the look of a man who had not slept and had spent the hours of not sleeping doing useful things. He stood when she came in. Ms. Santoro. Marin, she said, thank you for meeting me. I've been waiting for someone to call. He gestured at the seat across from him. I should have called myself 6 weeks ago. I'm sorry I didn't move sooner. It doesn't help either of us to be sorry right now, she said, sitting. What helps us is what you have. He opened the portfolio. What Warren Chu had was meticulous. The audit committee had been quietly building their own records since October. Internal bank statements cross-referenced with published filing numbers, 3 independent analyses from outside accountants, and a communication chain that included 2 emails from Brett Calder's legal team asking the committee to stand down pending internal review. Those emails, Marin said, leaning forward, the ones from his legal team. Yes. They asked you to stand down. They strongly suggested, on what grounds? They cited a pending regulatory review of the foundation's accounting structure. There was no pending regulatory review. Chu looked at her over the portfolio. No, there wasn't. She sat back. The false representation to the audit committee. That was obstruction. That was something a prosecutor could move on independently of everything else. Something that did not depend on the file submission that had been flagged. Something that existed in Chu's portfolio on paper with dates and signatures. I need you to submit this to the DA's office directly, she said. Today. Not through the Financial Crimes Unit, directly to the DA's office as evidence of obstruction of an internal audit process. Chu looked at the portfolio. If I do that, you'll be on the right side of this, completely and publicly. That matters when this breaks open, and it is going to break open. The only question is whether you're ahead of it or behind it. He was quiet for a moment. A man doing the calculation she'd watched a lot of people do in the past 24 hours. The particular arithmetic of self-preservation in a situation where self-preservation and the right thing had converged, which made the decision easier without making it easy. All right, he said. Today, she said. This morning. This morning, he agreed. She left the building at 11:40. Outside, the air was colder than when she'd gone in, and the sky had the gray compressed look of weather that hadn't decided yet what it was going to do. She walked half a block and stood at a corner and called Veyron. "Chu is moving," she said. "DA's office. Obstruction angle. Independent of our submission." A pause that was a different kind of pause than the ones before. "When?" he said. "Within the hour. He's drafting the submission now." "Marin?" His voice had something in it she hadn't heard there before. "That's... Don't say it." "I was going to say it's good work." She stood at the corner. A bus went past. Someone on a bicycle threaded through the intersection at a speed that made no allowances for consequence. "Vassell is still moving," she said. "Whatever Chu does doesn't stop that." "No." "But it changes the math. 2 independent submissions from non-law enforcement sources. One from a named party with documented obstruction evidence. That's much harder to suppress without the suppression becoming the story." He paused. "We're not out of this, but we're in a better position than we were 2 hours ago." "How much better?" "Enough to manage, not enough to stop watching." She looked at the street. She thought about the folder, still somewhere in the safe house, or the car, or wherever it had ended up after the night. She thought about the microphone and the stage, and the room full of people who had come to watch a wedding and had watched something else instead. She thought about Breck in a room somewhere with people asking him questions, and Tessa in a diner getting cold, and her mother in the house on Carver Street watching the morning news and understanding gradually what kind of story she was living inside. She thought about Dmitri Vassell, a man whose name appeared in no public record, who moved through the city's infrastructure like water through a cracked wall. Everywhere, invisible, cold, and wearing away the foundation from the inside. And she understood, standing on that corner in December, that the thing she had started 3 weeks ago at a family dinner table was not finished. It had entered a different phase, more dangerous, less visible, with higher stakes than the ones she'd gone into Harrow Hall to settle. And she was going to have to see it through, not because she had planned to, but because there was no longer any version of stepping back that did not leave something essential of herself on the table. Her phone went again. Not Veyron. A number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. She stood on the corner for the 3rd ring, and on the 4th she picked up. "Ms. Ellis," said a voice. Male. Unhurried. The specific unhurried quality of someone who is never in a hurry because the world arranges itself around their schedule. "My name is not important. What's important is that you and I have a mutual problem, and I think we'd both benefit from a brief conversation before this morning gets any further along." She held the phone. Her heart was going. "How did you get this number?" she said. "The same way I get everything," said the voice of Dmitri Vassell. "I asked." She did not hang up. That was the first decision, made in the span of a single breath on a street corner in December with a bus exhaust rising in the cold air and a stranger's voice in her ear. She did not hang up because hanging up was a form of running, and she had decided somewhere between the courthouse and the diner and the 14th floor conference room that she was done running from things that were coming regardless. "Say what you want to say," she told the voice. A pause. Not the pause of someone caught off guard. The pause of someone who has set a scene and is allowing it a moment to breathe. "There is a version of this morning," said Vassell, "in which you and your husband walk away from everything that happened last night without consequence. The file submission is already complicated. The investigator is suspended. These things can be managed further if the motivation for managing them goes away. You want me to pull back? I want you to understand that what you exposed last night was a small piece of a much larger structure. Pulling one thread does not unravel the fabric. It only marks you as someone willing to pull threads. And marked people have problems. Marked people have accidents," he said. Flat. No particular emphasis. A statement of meteorological fact, the way you tell someone it will rain. She stood on the corner. She felt the cold through the sweater. She felt her heart, and she let it go at whatever rate it needed to go, and she focused on keeping her breathing even, because even breathing was the only thing she could control right now, and she was going to control what she could. "Here's what I want you to understand," she said. "Warren Chu filed a submission to the DA's office 11 minutes ago. Independent documentation. Obstruction evidence. His name is on it, not mine. You can suspend him too, but you'll need a reason, and the reason will become a story." She kept her voice level. The story is already moving. It moved last night when I stood at a microphone in front of 120 people, and it moved again this morning when the investigator you suspended became a data point instead of a solution. Every move you make to close this now creates more surface area. Silence. You've thought about this, Vassell said. I've had time. You had one night. I'm a fast thinker. Another pause. Different from the first. She could not read it, and she did not try. What do you want? He said. I want Breck Calder prosecuted. I want the consulting entities dissolved and the foundation's misappropriated funds returned. I want the documentation my husband submitted to the Financial Crimes Unit reopened and treated as a legitimate submission. She paused. I don't want your name. I don't want your structure. I don't want anything that goes further than Calder. You're drawing a line. I'm telling you where my interests stop. And if I don't believe you, then we find out what happens when 3 independent evidence streams hit the DA's office and the press simultaneously on the same morning. My husband has relationships with certain journalists, the kind of relationships that predate my involvement. I don't control what he does with those relationships. She let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. But I imagine you've already thought about that. The silence this time was longer. She stood absolutely still in it. A woman walked past with a stroller. A delivery truck idled at the curb 20 feet away. The world continued at its standard pace, indifferent to the fact that she was standing in the middle of it, having a conversation that was determining the shape of the next several years of her life. Calder is already cooperating, Vassell said finally. She processed this. Since when? Since last night. He provided a voluntary statement at 2 this morning. He named the consulting entities. He provided his own documentation. A pause. He did not name me. He has his reasons for that, which I won't discuss with you. The point is that the financial crimes investigation is now a cooperative one, which means the suspended investigator is a problem I need to resolve rather than a solution I can rely on. She understood what he was telling her. Breck, facing the weight of what was coming, had made the calculation that cooperation was survivable and resistance wasn't. He had named the structure without naming the man above it, which meant Vassell was already exposed at the structural level and was now engaged in a form of rapid strategic adjustment. He hadn't called to threaten her. He had called because she was a variable he needed to understand. The submission gets reopened, she said. Today. By end of business, he said. And the suspended investigator will be reinstated with an explanation that the complaint was filed in error. She breathed. We don't speak again, she said. No, he agreed. We don't. The line went dead. She stood on the corner for a long time after, long enough that the delivery truck moved on, and a different one took its place and moved on as well. Long enough that her fingers went numb in the cold, and she had to move them deliberately to bring the feeling back. Then she called Veyron. She told him everything. She told it in sequence, concisely, without editorializing, and he listened without interrupting, which was one of the things she had come to depend on without meaning to. The quality of his listening, the way it was complete without being passive. When she finished, there was a pause. The investigator will be reinstated by end of business, he said. Not a question. That's what he said. And you believe him. She thought about the voice, the quality of it. The unhurried precision of a man who had survived in the spaces between legal structures for long enough that his word, when he gave it, was the only currency that worked. Yes, she said, in this specific case, because it costs him less than the alternative. All right? Another pause. Come back to the safe house. I'll come back this afternoon. I have one more thing to do. She went to Carver Street. Her mother's car was in the driveway. The hydrangeas had been trimmed again since the last time she'd noticed them. Or maybe they were the same and the light was different. She stood at the foot of the porch steps for a moment, looking at the house. The colonial her mother had maintained with fierce, joyless discipline for 30 years. The porch light that was always on. The front door with the slight warp in the lower left corner that had never been fixed. She knocked. She had stopped knocking years ago. She knocked now because this visit was different from the visits that had allowed her to let herself in without announcing herself, and Judith deserved the distinction. Her mother answered the door in the gray dress from the wedding, still wearing it at noon, which told Maren everything she needed to know about the kind of night Judith had spent. They looked at each other. "Come in," Judith said. The house smelled the way it always smelled, coffee and the particular wood polish her mother had used on the floors since before Maren could remember. They went to the kitchen because the kitchen was where the real conversations in this family had always happened, even the ones that began in other rooms. Judith poured coffee without asking. They sat at the table where they had sat for 40 years of mornings. "I've been watching the news," Judith said. "What have they got so far?" "Enough. Breck called her, the foundation, a formal investigation." She held her cup in both hands. "Tessa called me at 7. "I know, I spoke to her first." Judith looked at her. "You told her about the document, the timeline." "She needed to know." "How is she?" Maren considered this honestly. "She's the kind of damage you can come back from, if you make the right decisions going forward. Whether she will—" She stopped. "I don't know, that's up to her." Judith nodded, set her cup down, looked at the table in the particular way that meant she was organizing something she had needed to say for longer than the immediate situation. "I want to tell you something," her mother said. "Okay, I knew there was something developing between her and Breck." Judith kept her eyes on the table. "I didn't know for certain, but I felt it, in the way she talked about him, in the way she didn't." She paused. "I told myself it wasn't what it looked like. I told myself I was imagining things." Maren held the cup. "I chose the story I could manage," Judith said, "because the other story—" She stopped. Her jaw tightened. "Because I couldn't see a way through the other story that didn't cost me both of you." The kitchen was quiet. Outside, a bird went through a rapid sequence of notes and stopped. "So you said nothing," Maren said. "I said nothing. And when it came out at that dinner, you put your hand on her arm." Judith looked up. Her eyes were dry, but the dryness was effortful in a way that wasn't performance. It was the look of someone who has been crying for hours and has run out of the resource and is now operating in what comes after. "Yes," she said. "I did." Maren sat with this. She turned the cup in her hands the way she had been turning cups in her hands for the past 2 days. The small tactile anchor of an ordinary object in a situation that had nothing ordinary left in it. "I'm not going to tell you it's all right," Maren said, "because it isn't. You chose peace over me, and I felt it, and it will be a while before that stops mattering." She looked at her mother. "But I'm also not going to pretend I don't know why you did it. You were scared. You were trying to hold the family together with whatever you had." She paused. "I understand the math, even when I hate the answer." Judith looked at her. "I protected the wrong daughter," she said. "Not a confession dressed as something else. Just the plain sentence, without cushioning." "For a long time," Maren agreed. "Yes." They sat in the kitchen of the house on Carver Street for another hour. They did not resolve everything. There was not enough time in an hour, and likely not enough time in several years to resolve everything. But they talked, and the talking was different from the talking they usually did in this house, which was the talking of people moving around surfaces. This was the other kind, the kind with friction, the kind that leaves a mark but means something went through. When Maren left, she kissed her mother's cheek, and Judith held on for a moment longer than she usually did, and Maren let her, and then she walked out and down the porch steps and to the street, and she did not look back at the house because she didn't need to. She had said what she'd needed to say. The rest would happen, or it wouldn't in its own time, at a rate she couldn't control. She was learning, slowly and at considerable cost, that this was true of most things. Breck Calder was formally charged 11 days later. Financial fraud, wire fraud, obstruction of a nonprofit audit process. His attorney released a statement. The statement used the word cooperative 4 times. The foundation board dissolved the current structure and announced an independent review and reconstitution. 3 of the shell consulting entities were traced to a holding company that went through 2 offshore jurisdictions before arriving, obliquely, at a name that the Financial Crimes Unit's investigation found sufficient to recommend further inquiry. That inquiry was ongoing. It would be ongoing for a long time. Dmitry Vassel's name never appeared in any filing. The investigator was reinstated by 4:30 on the day of their phone call, which was a Tuesday. And the reason cited for his suspension was administrative error, which was technically accurate in the way that things can be technically accurate while being completely false. And no one with the standing to dispute it chose to. Marin thought about this sometimes. She thought about the line she had drawn and the man who had agreed to stay behind it, and whether the agreement held because it was in his interest, or because there was something in it that resembled, at its most stripped-down level, a form of respect. She never determined which. She decided the distinction was less important than the outcome. Tessa cooperated fully with the investigation. She provided every document she had, including the transfer record she'd found in October and the emails from Breck's legal team. And she did it without being asked twice and without negotiating for immunity first, which her attorney told her was unusual. Tessa told her attorney it was not a strategy. The attorney said in his experience those were the same thing. Tessa did not respond to that. The marriage was dissolved before the year was out. There was no contested proceeding. Breck signed what was put in front of him. Tessa left the city in February. Not in disgrace exactly. She left the way people leave when a version of their life has ended, and the city itself has become a record of that version, every street corner a timestamp, every familiar face a witness. She went to a place small enough that her history didn't precede her, and large enough that she could build something without it being under constant observation. She called Marin twice before she left. The calls were not long, but they were honest, which was new between them, and honesty at the cost of comfort was not comfortable, but it was real, and they were both learning to prefer the real thing to its substitute. Judith Ellis retired from the charitable board she'd sat on for 12 years and spent the spring cleaning out the house on Carver Street. She called Marin one evening from the middle of this process, standing in the room that had been their father's study, and she said, unprompted, "There's a box here with your name on it. Your father left it specifically for you. I've had it for 11 years. A pause. "I should have given it to you sooner." Marin drove to Carver Street that weekend and took the box. Inside it were letters, her father's handwriting, addressed to her, dated across the last 2 years of his life, covering things he'd wanted to say, and apparently found easier to write than speak. She read them over 3 evenings in her apartment. She did not share their contents with anyone. The Foundation for Women Escaping Financial Abuse was incorporated in March. Marin used a portion of the restored endowment as seed funding. She chose a board of 7 people, none of whom she owed anything and none of whom owed her, because she had learned enough to know that the dynamic of owing was where most institutional corruption began. The foundation's overhead was documented publicly and audited quarterly by a firm she had personally vetted. She was not interested in the foundation as a personal brand. She was interested in it as a mechanism, a thing that worked, quietly and consistently, without needing her face on it to justify its existence. The first year, they helped 31 women. She thought about that number sometimes. 31. Not a large number in the context of the problem, large enough to matter in the context of 31 lives. The dissolution of her arrangement with Veyron was something they discussed once, formally, on an evening in late January in the apartment that had become, over the preceding months, something closer to a shared space than either of them had planned. The discussion lasted approximately 20 minutes. It covered the legal mechanics, the timeline, the notification requirements. It was practical and precise, and at the end of it they sat in the kitchen in silence for a while and neither of them moved to do anything about what they'd just discussed. "You could leave," she said, eventually. He looked at her across the table. "I could," he said. "The arrangement is served. The purpose is complete." She kept her voice even. "There's no obligation." "I know there isn't." So, he was quiet for a moment. She had learned the varieties of his silence the way you learn the weather of a place you've been living in. Their different weights, their different implications, what each one usually preceded. This one was not the calculating silence and not the watchful silence. It was something quieter and less defended. "I stayed in a room with you," he said slowly, "while you called a man who had threatened your safety and drew him a line, and he moved behind it. I watched you go to your mother and say the true thing and not use it as a weapon. I watched you tell your sister the worst thing about her marriage before the prosecution did, because you thought she deserved to hear it from someone who understood what it cost." He looked at the table. "Those are not the actions of someone I have an arrangement with." She sat with that. "What are they the actions of?" she said. He looked up. "Someone I'd like to know better. if that's a thing you'd consider. She thought about the courthouse 11 minutes, the dark metal ring, and the handshake in the corridor. The first dinner where they had sat across from each other, and she had been certain she understood exactly what kind of transaction she was entering. She thought about the safe house kitchen at 2 in the morning, and the coffee, and the particular tiredness in his face that had been real, and the question he had asked her, "How are you holding up?" and the fact that he had corrected himself when she gave him the social answer. "That's a thing I'd consider," she said. The dissolution paperwork sat in a folder on the kitchen shelf for another 6 weeks. Eventually they filed it, not because anything had been decided, but because the legal architecture of the arrangement had served its purpose, and they were both people who believed in keeping their paperwork accurate. They were still married afterward in the technical sense that a different set of paperwork had not yet been completed. And then enough time passed that the second set of paperwork became a theoretical consideration rather than a pending task. And then it became something neither of them mentioned, and eventually it became a fact of their life. Not performed, not announced, not explained to anyone who asked, simply present in the way that things are present when two people have decided, without making a ceremony of the decision, that they are choosing each other. He was not easy. She did not expect easy and would not have trusted it. He had a past that was complicated in ways that would require ongoing navigation, and she had a temper she'd spent years mislabeling as composure, and they disagreed, sometimes significantly, on how to handle situations where their respective instincts pointed in different directions. These were not small things. They did not become smaller with time. They became more familiar, which was different, and familiarity made them manageable in ways that the early months had not. The gala was in October, 10 months after Harrow Hall, a fundraising event for the foundation, not their first, but the first large one, the kind with a venue and donors and press. She had not wanted press, and had been persuaded by the foundation's communications director that press was how you built the kind of institutional trust that kept the overhead scrutiny coming, and she had accepted this because it was true, even though she didn't like it. She got dressed without help, in the apartment that had accumulated over 10 months, the particular texture of a shared life. His jacket on the back of the chair, her books on the shelf beside his, the coffee cups they had each claimed without discussing it. She put on a dress that was not black and not silk. It was a dark green thing with weight to it, a different weight than the dress she'd worn to Harrow Hall, something she had bought because she liked it, rather than because it would read a certain way in a room. She stood at the mirror and looked at herself, not at the diamonds. She wasn't wearing the diamonds. She was wearing a pair of small gold earrings that had been her father's mother's, found in the box on Carver Street among the letters. She looked at her own face. She looked at the woman in it. The one who had driven to a family dinner with grocery store wine and come out the other side of something she hadn't known was coming. The one who had stood at a microphone and told the true things, and then spent a night in a safe house and a morning calling people from street corners in borrowed clothes, managing a situation that had cascaded past every plan she'd made into something that required improvisation at a level she hadn't known she was capable of. That woman was still recognizable, also different. She thought the difference had something to do with knowing her own weight, not who she was in relation to other people's definitions of her, not the reasonable one or the practical one, or the woman who was expected to absorb betrayal gracefully and make it easy for everyone around her. She knew what she was made of now in a way she hadn't known before, the way you don't know what you're made of until it's been tested, until the temperature has gotten high enough to show you what holds and what doesn't. What held had surprised her. What hadn't had surprised her too. She was still thinking about this when Veron came into the room. He was dressed for the evening, dark, as he always was, nothing that announced itself. He stood in the doorway and looked at her for a moment the way he looked at things he was deciding how to be with. "Ready?" he said. She picked up her bag. "Yes," she said. They went down to the car together and through the city that was cold and lit and moving at its standard pace and entirely unaware of the particular significance of this night to the two people in the car going through it. That was fine. That was as it should be. She was not interested anymore in the version of her life that required the room to know what it meant. She was interested in what it actually was. The gala venue was a repurposed industrial space, brick walls, high windows, the kind of bones that held history without performing it. She had chosen it deliberately. When they arrived, the staff met them at the entrance, and the development director said something about the turnout, and the board chair shook her hand, and the evening opened around her with the warmth of a room full of people who were here for the thing the foundation was doing rather than the story the foundation had come from. She stood at the entrance for a moment before going in. Veyron stood beside her. She looked at the room, the people, the tables, the warm industrial light, the work of 10 months visible in the structure of the evening, and in the faces of some of the women who had gone through the Foundation's first programs, who were here tonight as guests rather than cases, which was the entire point. She thought about 31. She thought about the dinner table on Carver Street, and the grocery store wine, and the AC in her car that was finally fixed, had been fixed in August because she'd finally added it to the list and then done the thing on the list instead of moving it to the next one. She thought about the stage at Harrow Hall and the weight of the folder and the 4-second silence when the room understood what had come through the door. She breathed. She stepped forward into the room. Not because a room needed to see her, not to prove anything to anyone who had doubted her or discarded her or asked her to be smaller than she was. She walked into the room because the work was in it, and the work was real, and she had built it, and that was enough. More than enough. It was the thing itself, the actual thing, the life she had stopped waiting for permission to live. Behind her, Veyron followed. The door closed. The evening began.